Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Jeremy Corbyn says the Prime Minister has yet to make what he called a big offer in cross-party talks, Brexit talks aimed at ending the Brexit deadlock. The Labour leader said negotiations were difficult because the government was in disarray. Launching the party's European election campaign, Mr Corbyn said Labour was more interested in uniting people than labelling them Remainers or Leavers. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has more.
Brexit is a long and a strange journey. Labour in Kent today to launch a campaign for European elections that were never meant to happen, trying to impress all of us with a promise from Jeremy Corbyn he'd compromise to take us out of the EU.
A vote for Labour is a vote to bring our divided country back together. Labour is the only party with a plan to unite our country and make it work for the many, not the few.
Calls for another referendum lurk here, though. Jeremy Corbyn's mention of the possibility raised the cheer. And the chances of talks with the Tories working out seem very faint.
There's been no big offer, and the red lines remain in place. It's actually quite difficult negotiating with a disintegrating government.
Can you tell voters if Labour is now definitely a Brexit party, or could you still be a Remain party?
We triggered Article 50, that was respecting the referendum. And as you know, our manifesto includes the option of a public vote on the outcome.
So Labour MPs backed Brexit in the Commons, but might still offer another say. They love him here, but there are nerves about facing so many ways.
Oh, do you want a pirouette?
I'm very disappointed in the kind of half and half attitude of the party.
He's looking at what's important for the country, not what's important for within the Labour Party. He's looking at a wider picture.
Us Remainers lost the vote, and therefore they need to do what they were voted in to do and get us out of Europe.
Jeremy Corbyn says he can pull the whole country together. It shouldn't matter who was Leave and who Remain. But that question is live and kicking in his own party and in the country. Labour's careful compromise of ifs and buts on Brexit might not find many friends at a time when so many voters are aching for something crystal clear.
I think they have no strategy, they have no way forward, and I think they're just making mischief.
Get on, go with it, and just work with what we've got, really.
I think the Labour Party is sitting back, feeling we're glad we're not in the Tories' position.
What do you think of what's going on?
I think it's a fiasco, it's a political fiasco.
A political fiasco? Why?
But whose fiasco? Yours to judge at the ballot box in 2 weeks' time. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Gillingham.
The Scottish National Party also launched their European election campaign today with a straightforward appeal to vote for them in order to stop Brexit. Leader Nicola Sturgeon accused the Tories of treating the Scottish Parliament with contempt. She said the elections were Scotland's chance to make its voice heard, as Lorna Gordon reports.
Nicola Sturgeon's core message on the European Union has never wavered. Scotland is a country which, she says, lies geographically on the edge of the EU, but wants to remain at its heart.
This is by far the most important European election in Scotland's history.
The party she leads, the SNP, would like to see 2 referendums, another vote on Europe, and if the country does leave, another on Scottish independence.
If people do vote for the SNP in the European elections, do you see that as strengthening your case for independence for Scotland?
People who support independence, I certainly will want to vote SNP to express that view. But my message to people who don't support independence is if you don't want to see Scotland continually ignored, if you don't want to see our interests disregarded and cast aside, and if you want to see Scotland and indeed the whole UK stay within the European Union, then vote SNP.
Nicola Sturgeon's argument that Westminster politicians have ignored Scotland's interests for too long isn't new. But this vote is, she says, a golden opportunity to send a strong, unequivocal message that Scotland is not in favour of Brexit.
So is this likely to whet the appetite of Scottish voters?
I want to vote and vote for something like Remain, then I could vote for the Greens, I could vote kind of for Labour maybe, but then I could also vote for the SNP, I could vote for the Change UK party, and like, I don't know.
I would like the SNP to win the day on that and for Scotland to stay in Europe.
I always thought I wanted to be part of Europe, but I'm split now, it's 50-50.
They'll be hoping to change his mind with a campaign theme clear to all. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Edinburgh.
The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn took aim at Nigel Farage today as he launched his party's European election campaign. Mr Corbyn said the new Brexit party was sowing division and called on voters to look beyond the labels of Leave and Remain. From Chatham, here's our political correspondent, Libby Vina.
Undaunted by a poor showing in the local elections, Jeremy Corbyn today claimed that Labour could do well in the European elections, not by taking sides for or anti-Brexit, but by taking on the new Brexit party.
Nigel Farage's Brexit is a Brexit for conspiracy theorists, for those who see Muslims and migrants or George Soros as their enemy. Only Labour can see off the Farage snake oil in this election.
He argued that Leave and Remain were old labels, dismissing the idea that confusion over Labour's policy could cost the party votes.
Why should voters bother to turn out if they don't really know whether you're in favour of leaving the EU or remaining in it?
I don't think it's confusing at all. I think it is a sensible message saying we understand what's happened, we've seen what's happened, we've seen the causes of what's happened, and we're putting forward a view that would ensure we have the opportunity of improving the social divisions within our society.
By coming to Chatham, a Leave-supporting area, Jeremy Corbyn was clearly signalling that under him Labour won't try to thwart Brexit. But that's precisely what many of his MPs and large numbers of Labour voters actually want. Andy Whitehall, visiting the dockyard today, has always voted Labour and thinks Jeremy Corbyn should now clearly back Remain.
I think that the Labour Party needs to wake up and smell the coffee and actually think about where they want to be seen. Do they want to be seen as stayers or do they want to be seen as leavers?
I think they seem to be saying one thing and then saying the opposite. So again, I don't know. I'm too confused really to give an opinion.
Do you know which way you're going to vote yet?
I'll vote Brexit.
For the Brexit party?
Yes, certainly.
It's something we don't agree on.
Yes, yeah.
You think Nigel Farage is the man who's got it right?
Yes.
No.
It's not just Jeremy Corbyn, then, who thinks that Farage is the man to beat. Libby Vina, ITV News, Chatham.
The SNP has launched its European election campaign in Edinburgh. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said this will be the most important European election in Scotland's history. The party will field candidates for all 6 of the seats in Scotland.
Jeremy Corbyn has launched Labour's European election campaign with the claim that his party has something to offer everyone, whichever side of the Brexit argument they're on. With only 2 weeks until the vote, there has been a rush of manifesto announcements today. The SNP are campaigning to stop Brexit altogether, and the Liberal Democrats launched their anti-Brexit campaign this evening. Out in Romania, the leaders of the EU minus Theresa May had a special summit to discuss Europe's future after the elections. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
This EU summit in Romania was meant to be the first gathering of leaders after Brexit. It went ahead even though Britain hasn't yet managed to leave. Theresa May wasn't invited anyway. The European Commission President was asked if he wished she was there.
I'm missing her.
The delay to Brexit has meant Britain must hold European Parliament elections, even though elected MEPs may not sit in the Parliament for long at all. In Kent, at the launch of its manifesto for the European elections, Labour's leader said his party wants to appeal to both sides in the Brexit debate.
Some people seem to look at the issue the wrong way round. They tend to think the first question is leave or remain, as if either is actually an end in itself. I think they're wrong. The first question is, what kind of society do we want to be? We insist the real divide in our country is not how people voted in 2016. The real divide is between the many and the few.
Defending Labour's policy of offering something to everyone, Jeremy Corbyn said a second referendum could be a healing process. Labour's pro-Remain opponents are trying to exploit that straddling of two sides. The SNP launching their campaign in Edinburgh.
It is striking, I would say depressing, just how close together Labour and the Tories are on Brexit.
The Lib Dems manifesto borrowed its front page from the street protests outside Parliament. Its leadership united with the pro-Remain Change UK party for talks with the government today.
We need a new centrist, liberal, social democratic, moderate force and parties working together, which is what we're doing today.
But they're running separate candidates in the European elections, and tonight it was confirmed in the Peterborough by-election as well.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Back in Kent, signs that some aren't heeding the Labour leader's advice to shed their Brexit identities.
I've never voted for the European elections before, but this time, if the UKIP party or Brexit party are in there, then I'm going to vote for them because I want out full stop.
I think that we should stay in Brexit. I think we should stay in Europe.
All I want to do is to vote to get out like I voted in the first place, and that they should respect the public's vote.
Back in Romania, EU leaders announced there'll be a special summit just after the European election results are announced. Theresa May is invited to that gathering, but given expectations of the Tory drubbing, she may have other things on her mind.
Well, joining me now from East London at the launch of her party's European election campaign is the Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Jo Swinson. And here with me in the studio is Claude Moraes, who's been a London MEP since 1999 and is standing again this time round. Jo Swinson, first, there's no doubt about it, your message is pretty simple, pretty blunt. You did well in the local elections, but in these European elections, you'll be facing a handful of other pro-Remain parties. Isn't the greatest danger you split the Remain vote and hand a tidy victory to Nigel Farage and his Brexit party?
Well, you're quite right. The Liberal Democrats had a great night on the local election night with 704 gains. We are the biggest and strongest party of Remain with a very clear message that we want to stop Brexit. Obviously, it would have been ideal if there had been able to be some type of arrangement between pro-Remain parties. We hoped that that would happen, but it was a shame that it didn't. But that said, we go into these elections with a great momentum behind us. And as I say, that very clear message, stop Brexit. If you want to stop Brexit, the clearest way to do that is to vote Liberal Democrat on the 23rd of May.
Yes, but on the question, isn't there a danger you split the Remain vote and victory goes to Nigel Farage, pro-Brexit party?
Well, I think in analysing the results, it'll be necessary to look at the percentages of the different parties that support having a people's vote and staying in the EU. And clearly, Nigel Farage, in that time as leader of the UKIP party, got the highest vote back in 2014. And I don't think people will be surprised if that is the result that happens this time round. But I think if you look at the strength of pro-EU parties, that was the message of the local elections last week. And, the drubbing that the Conservatives got was pretty clear, and in particular Labour, who are letting people down.
Well, Claude Moraes, the Lib Dem message on the doorstep, stop Brexit, that's simple. What's yours?
No, well, Labour is the party that is offering a referendum. That is now in the manifesto. I know the Lib Dems don't like it, but it's in the manifesto.
It's not quite what Jeremy Corbyn is saying, is it?
It is what he's saying. It's in the manifesto. If we don't get the deal we want, then the people will be off to vote. Now, we have to unify the country. You've got the far right creating division in our communities. Jo is sitting and standing in a place I know very well, which is Brick Lane. I canvassed there, I lived around there. And we've got that kind of division in our country. You saw it in your piece. And we are offering a transformative manifesto. I'm actually an MEP standing in this election. Jo isn't.
But the idea you can offer something for everyone.
Well, it's not something for everyone. We campaigned in the referendum for Remain. If there was a bad deal and a Remain option, of course, I would vote for Remain. So let's be very clear. We're talking about many hypothetical things in the future, but Jo and our colleagues haven't actually done very well in getting to a good deal, and we're offering that option now in our manifesto. But our manifesto manifesto is packed with progressive policies. And I would also add, Joe talked about, and you talked about, something which didn't get an answer, which is, do we run the danger of the Brexit party winning? Yes, there is a split vote there amongst Remain parties, but also under our D'Hondt voting system, there are many regions where if you don't vote Labour, where we're the party that can beat the Brexit party,
Joe Swinson,
then that is a problem.
Come in on that, Joe Swinson.
Claude talks about if we don't get a good deal, if we don't... I'm really clear. The best deal that we can possibly have is as members of the European Union. And I would have thought that that would have been the deal that Claude would want as well. But like so many Labour politicians, many of whom we are working with to try to deliver a people's vote, but they are also being let down by their leadership, who are intent on this fudge. And, you know, that means Labour is now a pro-Brexit party. I'm a big fan of fudge, but too much fudge makes you sick. And I really think that
it's a good line.
This obfuscation from the Labour Party, they need to get off the fence.
It's a good line from the Lib Dems fudge, but if you dig deeper in many of our regions, where we have quite small regions, 6, in one case at least 3, what the problem you have is if you split the vote amongst other Remain parties, if you don't vote for the party Labour, which is fighting the Brexit party, you do run this danger under D'Hondt of letting Nigel Farage in. I don't want him to be let in.
Very quickly,
I want people to vote Labour.
Mary Cray, one of your own MPs,
one
of your own Labour MPs, Mary Cray, says simply standing in the middle of the road, you get run over on both sides.
But today, our manifesto commitment was clear, that there is the offer of a people's vote if we don't get the deal we want, and that is now clearly in the manifesto, along with transformative policies on climate change. You just had that in your package. We're spending millions to deal with that. The solution is in the European Union, delivered, by the way, by Labour MEPs as well.
Joe Swinson, there is that point still stands. You may split the vote.
It's not ifs and buts. It's a clear agenda from us in our manifesto.
It's all ifs and buts. It's all ifs and buts and maybes from Labour. It's really clear Labour are supporting Brexit in these elections.
No, we're not.
If you vote for Labour, your vote will be interpreted as a vote for Brexit, for a Brexit deal. Claude's just said...
Vote for Labour, it's a referendum option and a unifying...
So if you want to have an end to Brexit, you need to
Joe
vote Lib Dem.
Swinson, Claude Moraes, thank you very much for joining us, both of you. Sorry we have to finish it there.
Are you a Leaver or a Remainer? And how much will that influence how you vote or don't vote in the forthcoming European elections? Labour is hoping to heal the country and help the UK move on from Brexit. Well, that was certainly the sales pitch from Jeremy Corbyn today. Unfortunately, Brexit, as you may have noticed, has yet to happen. So arguably, it's hard to move on from something that hasn't taken shape. David Grossman was at Labour's European Election Manifesto launch in Kent earlier today.
A former Navy drill hall in Chatham, where generations of sailors have learnt to march in step, was the chosen site of Labour's Euro election launch. An odd location, some might suggest, since many accuse Labour of marching in several different directions at once when it comes to Brexit. Mr Corbyn's message was all about putting the divisions of Brexit behind us.
We could all retreat to our respective side of the argument and let the bitterness drive us further apart. We could allow ourselves to be defined only as Remainers or Leavers, labels that meant nothing to us only a few years ago. But where would that take us? Who wants to live in a country stuck in this endless loop? What's needed is a bit of understanding.
But here's Labour's problem. The majority of its activists and MPs don't want the party to understand Brexit so much as resist it by committing to a second referendum. A section of Mr Corbyn's speech where he talked about respecting the referendum result was greeted with silence.
Over 17 million people voted to leave the European Union. As democratic socialists, we cannot ignore that. We voted to trigger Article 50 in 2017 and promised to respect the referendum in our general election manifesto. And again,
now contrast that reception with how the audience greeted this section where Mr Corbyn talks about a second referendum.
If we can't get a sensible deal along the lines of our alternative plan or a general election, Labour backs the option of a public vote on it.
only one activist in the hall spoke up against the idea of a second referendum.
A little bit disappointed that we're doing that was what we were proposing, because 17 million people did vote to leave.
But the majority seem to think that the public should be consulted.
I think on the doorstep, people's opinions have been changing quite considerably on what they may have voted for. I still think the country's split terribly, and it depends what's influencing them through the media at the moment.
Labour's problem going into these elections is that however finely balanced their manifesto is, it might not survive contact with actual real-life voters. After all, the question at the forefront of many people's minds is this: should we push on with Brexit or abandon the project altogether? Labour suggesting that that question itself isn't fundamental and that we should be talking about other things may not resonate.
On the streets of Rochester, a few miles away from where Labour launched their manifesto, there was certainly plenty of confusion.
What is Labour's position on Brexit?
I have no idea.
Can you tell me what is Labour's position on Brexit?
I have no idea. I think they're all confused.
What is Labour's position on Brexit?
Well, they want out.
Are they in for Brexit or against Brexit?
Against, I believe.
Or somebody else.
Dancing around the question of remain or leave might be a shrewd move in keeping the party united in the run-up to elections that no one thought the UK would be holding. But it might not help Labour connect with voters.
Earlier, I sat down with Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Bergen, to talk about today's launch. It was his first BBC interview since footage emerged of him saying Zionism is the enemy of peace, a statement he had previously denied making. I spoke to him about this, but started our conversation by asking if Labour's attempt to appeal to both Leavers and Remainers was a risky move.
I understand what you mean, because the easiest thing for the Labour Party, or any party to do, would be to pick one side or the other. Then at least we'd have a body of people who agree with us on everything in relation to this issue, whether it be Leavers or Remainers. So I think the Labour Party has picked a difficult road, a road whereby we can be kicked from both sides.
You might be punished.
Yeah, but it's the right thing to do. I think it's the most difficult road, but it's the right road to take for the country as well, because we want to end this divide. Most people don't classify themselves primarily as being Leavers or Remainers, however strongly they feel about this issue. We want to end this divide in society and bring people together. It's a tough thing to do, but it's the right thing to do.
But even if you get absolutely drubbed in the polls and you do very badly in these European elections, will it still have been the right thing to do?
I think it is the right thing to do, and I don't think, by the way, that we're going to get
Well, predictions
drubbed.
a difficult game in politics.
It is very
But I suppose, just to quote Mary Cray, the Labour MP, she says, if Labour stands in the middle of the road on Brexit, we'll get run over from both directions.
That's true. It's a difficult position we've taken, but it's the right thing to do, because whether people live in Huddersfield and voted to leave or live in Hackney and voted to remain, they're both facing the problems of austerity, 9 years now of Conservative austerity, of cuts, of the housing crisis, of insecure, unstable
Yeah, but before
employment.
all of that, we're not having any legislation at the moment. It's a zombie parliament. They need a solution to get around for Brexit.
The reality is we don't have a real government. It's like a zombie government. It's almost as if Theresa May
Why are you getting in
isn't
bed with them
around
and doing
at all.
these talks for the last 5 weeks?
No, it was right that we entered into these talks, and it's right that we're still part of them, because
Is it?
we want to bring people together. We want to see it as a traditional British compromise, because most people I speak to, both in my own constituency when I'm campaigning across the country, actually just want this over and done with. They
Yeah,
want
but
a
they
traditional
also-
British compromise.
But they also want to be able to vote for a Labour Party where they know what the solution is going to be on Brexit. They don't want you in the middle of the road. They want to know. So let me ask you clearly, is Labour the party to stop Brexit?
The Labour Party doesn't exist to stop Brexit. Other parties have been formed that think that is their only purpose politically.
But the Labour MEP candidate, Lord Adonis, just to say, has said that's what you need to do. In these European elections, vote for Labour and we will stop Brexit.
I think he's corrected himself
No, that
since
was
then.
that was
But the
a very
Labour
recent
Party
tweet.
exists to bring people together, because we know that the real divide in this country isn't between whether people voted Leave or whether they voted Remain. It's actually the real divide is whether they're part of the 99% or the 1%. The 99% of people who are getting a rotten deal under this rotten system, whether we're in the EU or outside of the EU. And I think that Labour is well placed to showcase our values to the country in these elections, which nobody really expected to be having to take place, because a vote for Labour in these elections is a vote against scapegoating migrants, a vote...
So you're happy to fudge it?
It's not about a fudge.
It's what you've just admitted. You're saying it's a risk to be in the middle like this.
It is a risk. It's a hard road, but it's the right thing to do. And what people really need, from their politicians now, is people seeking to heal divides, not people seeking to expand divides for their narrow political advantage.
5 weeks into these talks then with the Conservatives, John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, said at the weekend he doesn't trust the Prime Minister due to leaks around this. The Prime Minister has said and her team they don't want to stay in a customs union like Labour wants. When are you going to actually walk away from these talks?
Well, we're not going to walk away from these talks lightly, because we didn't enter into these talks lightly.
I know, but 5 weeks in.
But I, for example, and many others, are getting more and more concerned that actually negotiating with this Prime Minister isn't as straightforward as some might hope, because she's actually negotiating with her own side continually, and all the time there's new candidates for Conservative Prime Minister popping up left, right and centre.
Yeah, but you look like you're propping up this government more
and more.
We're not propping up this government. So how long are you going to give it? Could you answer that? Is there a game plan?
We want to see an end to this government as soon as possible.
But 5 weeks in?
That's why we're calling for a general election.
How much longer are you going to give it, 5 weeks in?
Well, the negotiating team are taking it very seriously, but now it's time, 5 weeks in, as you say, for Theresa May to come forward and say she's actually dumping some of these red lines, and that she's not actually just trying to string along not only our Parliament, but the British public in an attempt to hold on to power for a few more weeks or even a few more days.
So you're going to keep going with them until she walks away? That's what it sounds like.
No, we're taking part in these negotiations in a responsible way. If it becomes fundamentally clear that it's become a waste of time because of Theresa May's behaviour and the Tories competing with each other to take over from her, then of course we'll no longer be taking part in these talks. We don't want to take part in something which just becomes a charade.
Today, Jeremy Corbyn labelled anyone who supports Nigel Farage and his Brexit party as Islamophobes, anti-Semites and conspiracy theorists. He says, quote, Nigel Farage's Brexit is a Brexit for conspiracy theorists, for those who see Muslims and migrants and George Soros as the enemy. Isn't that a bit rich coming from you?
Well, Nigel Farage, after 9 years of Conservative austerity, doesn't offer the solutions to anyone. This is someone who joined the Conservative Party at a young age. He's scapegoated migrants. He's called for the privatisation of our NHS. He offers cheap and easy slogans, but no solutions to the problems facing working class people across this country, whether they voted Leave or Remain, after 9 years of Conservative austerity.
But you're a man who believes that all Zionists are enemies of peace.
Well, that was a comment that I made. A video was showing me making that comment before I was an MP 5 years ago. I regret making that comment because it's an oversimplification, because actually it fails to distinguish between those Israeli citizens who are campaigning for peace, and people like Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, who are a clear barrier to peace and human rights.
But you lied. That video was captured, it was revealed a month ago, and when you were asked about it on the BBC by my colleague Andrew Neil, you said, not only did I not say that, you said that repeatedly, you said, I don't believe that. Why on earth should we believe anything you have to say when you outright lie?
Well, it's a serious point you made, Emma, and I certainly didn't lie. Let me explain. You put forward a serious point. Let me give the full answer to this. I was first asked by a newspaper in 2016 whether I'd made such a declaration. I couldn't remember making such a declaration.
It was an impassioned speech.
I asked them when I was meant to have said it and where. They couldn't tell me. Fast forward 2 years later to 2018, and your colleague Andrew Neil asked me if I made that comment in a meeting in 2016. I said, it's not my view. I said I'd been asked where I made this comment. And then a video a year after that came to light, not of 2016, where I did some speeches after I'd been to Palestine and Israel, but actually from 2014, 5 years ago, before I was even a Member of Parliament.
The enemy of the Palestinian people are Zionists. Zionism is the enemy of the peace. I do not have the time to read the entire thing.
It was a 30-second video. I think you have read the entire.
No, I've not.
That entire clip.
More of it's here. It carries on. You tell people to go and look up on the internet to find MPs, Labour MPs who are Labour Friends of Israel members, and you implore them to leave that. You keep going.
That speech, it turns out.
It's a speech. Why did you lie?
I've just explained I didn't lie.
Well, you just conveniently
I'm sure,
forgot.
I'm sure, Emma, that you can't remember every answer you've given to a question half a decade ago.
I could remember standing in front of a group of people and making an impassioned speech. And I'll tell you something else. I could remember it if it was my view. So are you sorry that you got caught, or are you sorry that that view was aired?
I don't use that. What I was seeking to do, as the transcript you've got shows, is distinguish between the Jewish people and other political actors. Lumping all Zionists together is clumsy and wrong.
You said what you said, you were asked about it, and you lied. And you're a man who just took this, if I can finish this point, you just took the Sun newspaper to court and won. You are a man who likes facts. You have a very senior position as Shadow Justice Secretary, which makes you a man of record. People would find it extremely difficult when they look this video up online, as they probably will after our interview, to think that you couldn't even remember making that speech and saying it.
The people.
You lied, so why should we believe a single word that comes out of your mouth? If you let me answer if that's okay. The people who put it to me that I made this comment couldn't say what year I was meant to have made it, couldn't say where I was meant to have made it, couldn't say what context I was meant to have made it. So does that make it okay for you to forget it conveniently?
They were saying I'd made it in 2016. I couldn't remember
using that turn. Year.
I couldn't remember using that turn of phrase.
You are so passionate in this video.
Half a decade ago.
You smeared an entire group of people around the world, so I ask you again, is it right for you to smear those people who support Nigel Farage because you say he's spreading lies when you've done exactly the same and you lied about not saying
Nigel Farage has made a career as a kind of snake oil salesman in politics, posing as being anti-establishment, while making out that the reason for austerity is actually to do with migration, whether it be from people from other EU countries or elsewhere. That is completely
may not be the
unfair.
Case. He's not here to answer my question.
I, like the Labour Party, want to see an end to the human rights abuses visited on the Palestinian people by Netanyahu's government. I, like the Labour Party, want to see a two-state outcome.
Anything you say. This isn't an interview about the foreign policy of Israel, it's an interview about you lying.
I've explained already that I forgot a phrase that it turns out I used half a decade ago before I was an MP. I think most of your viewers could identify with, did you use a phrase in an unspecified context half a decade ago before you were in your current job? I didn't tell a falsehood, and I've explained why I wouldn't use that phrase now.
Thank you very much for your time today. With Labour trying to appeal to both sides of the Brexit debate, their biggest rivals in Scotland planted their flag firmly in the Remain camp at their European election campaign launch. This is Nicola Sturgeon at today's launch.
At this election, the SNP offers a message of hope and ambition. Hope for a better country and ambition for the positive role that Scotland can and must play in Europe and in the wider world. This is by far the most important European election in Scotland's history. At stake is not just which parties and which candidates will be elected to the European Parliament. At stake also is whether Scotland can remain inside the European Union at all.
I'm joined by MP Tommy Shepherd, the party's spokesperson for Scotland. Good evening.
Good evening, Emma.
Let me ask, is a vote then for the SNP at these elections just a vote for Scottish independence?
No. When we ask people about Scottish independence in the next referendum, it will be clear and it will be specific on that subject. The vote we're asking people to make in 2 weeks' time for the European elections is to do two things. First of all, to say stop Brexit, stop it now. And secondly, to say Scotland is fed up being ignored and sidelined, both the Scottish public opinion and the views of the Scottish Government, who represent a country which voted overwhelmingly not to leave the European Union.
If it's not a vote for that, why did you ask in the Commons this week for an Indie Ref 2 if the SNP win these elections? It's just become a proxy, hasn't it?
Well, I didn't actually. I asked the Scottish Secretary whether he would regard the results of the European elections as an indicator that people in Scotland are fed up with his policies and do want a choice before they are dragged out of the European Union. We intend to give people that choice and not see Scotland dragged out of the EU against its will. And I think people should be given the option of voting to take government into their own hands and becoming an independent country rather than that happen.
But you need Brexit, so why aren't you supporting it? You need Brexit to get your second referendum.
No, that's not true at all. We don't need Brexit. I'm quite happy to campaign for Scottish independence. In fact, I wish Brexit had never started and never plagued us for these last 3 or 4 years. So we don't need Brexit. We're not using Brexit. We're trying to stop Brexit because it's bad for the whole of the United Kingdom, but it is particularly bad for Scotland, where we will be much worse affected compared to London.
If you stop Brexit, how do you then make the case for independence? Because then you're part of a United Kingdom that's remaining.
Because the case for Scottish independence is there, independent of the question of Brexit and that debate. Scotland can be a successful European nation on its own terms. We can have political control resting in the country where people who live here are the ones who are in charge of it.
But it gives,
and we will have
gives
the
new
best
life,
of relations.
Doesn't it? If Brexit happens, it strengthens your argument. It gives new life for Scottish independence after the failure of your last referendum.
Yes, but listen, the arguments for Scottish independence are there, and support for Scottish independence is increasing anyway. The fact that people have responding to the Brexit debate and are concerned about the way that Scotland has been treated in that process is fueling it, but it's not necessary to have Brexit in order to achieve Scottish independence. I would far rather stop Brexit and then move on to Scotland becoming an independent country inside the European Union, along with England and Wales being countries inside the European Union.
If you stop Brexit and you are even a part of that and you can take any credit for that, then surely there is a risk to that support that you said was growing for Scottish independence, because, as you say, it would then be the status quo and you would have stopped all that risk that you perceive Brexit poses.
No, I don't accept that for one moment. There are arguments for Scotland becoming an independent country which are nothing to do with Brexit. What Brexit has shown is that the current process, the current Westminster arrangements, are inadequate to meet Scotland's interests. They do not represent public opinion here, and the manner in which the Scottish Parliament has been treated has been absolutely abysmal. And that process, as much as the actuality of Brexit, has led an awful lot of people to reconsider the question of Scottish independence. In fact, before coming here tonight, I was knocking on doors for 2.5 hours, and I met many people who had voted against Scottish independence in 2014, who are now considering it not just because of Brexit and leaving the EU, but because of the manner in which Scotland has been treated by Westminster over the last 3 years.
Brexit has been useful to your cause. Let me just ask you very quickly before you go. This week, SNP MEP candidate Alan Smith has asked for EU observers to oversee this election, quote, because I don't have faith in our domestic authorities. Do you have faith that these European elections will be fair, Tommy Shepherd?
I do, but I think we have to be extremely vigilant, because I know there are certainly forces afoot, not in Scotland, but in some parts of the UK, who would want to sabotage and disrupt these elections. And I think, you know, we need to be very sure, and the authorities need to work closely with the police to make sure that democracy is respected and everyone gets the right to vote.
Tommy Shepherd, thank you very much.